welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered how animals in the wild manage to keep hunting, foraging, or fleeing even when they're carrying a pretty significant injury? Today we're unpacking a really incredible biological mystery about how our bodies prioritize survival. We're looking at fascinating new research that maps exactly what our brain on pain looks like. Specifically, we'll see how an intense state of hunger actually alters our neurobiology to suppress suffering.
So let's jump right in with a pretty provocative question. If you are injured, but you're also starving, which signal does your brain prioritize? Does the throbbing pain force you to rest, or does the gnawing hunger force you to get up and find a meal? How exactly does hunger affect pain? To survive, the brain has to make a calculation, a biological triage, if you will, weighing which need is absolutely critical in that exact moment.
Now, to solve this mystery, we first have to recognize the massive biological difference between two types of pain. First, there's acute pain. The sudden shock of touching a hot stove. It requires a lightning-fast reaction to prevent severe tissue damage. But then there's persistent pain. This is the ongoing, enduring ache of inflammation or nerve damage. It signals a long-term state, basically telling you to protect the injured area while it heals. As we're going to see, the brain handles these two types of pain very, very differently when you're starving.
First up, finding the pain hub. Let's head deep inside the brain to locate the exact control room for this persistent pain.
These spatial transcriptomic maps are just incredibly beautiful, and they reveal something called the lateral parabrachial nucleus, or LPBN. This region, which you can see mapped out here with all these complex molecular clusters, is a major entry point for sensory information coming up from your spinal cord. It's essentially the very first site where our emotional states are integrated. Researchers zeroed in right here to see if they could isolate the exact neurons responsible for long-lasting aches.
And right within that visually stunning region, scientists found them, Y1R neurons. This is a highly specialized group of cells that express a receptor for a chemical called neuropeptide Y. Through some really rigorous monitoring, researchers discovered that these Y1R neurons act like a sentinel. Basically, think of them like a car alarm that just won't shut off. They light up continuously during persistent pain states. They aren't just reacting to a quick pinch. They're actively broadcasting that enduring, long-term state of pain.
This snap shows exactly what happens when a long-term pain state is registered in the brain. Notice those deep purple dots? That's highlighting the heightened activity right inside this neural cluster. Whenever an animal is dealing with persistent inflammation or nerve damage, this specific hub in the brain is flipped firmly into the on position.
All right, moving on to how hunger suppresses pain. We know where the pain lives, but what actually happens to this hub when we're desperately hungry? Well, it turns out that when an animal experiences a competing life-or-death need state, like extreme fear, severe thirst, or hunger, the brain initiates a survival override. It actively suppresses the feeling of persistent pain. The need to eat to prevent starvation literally just outranks the need to nurse a swollen paw. Researchers observed this by looking at mice in two different states. Mice with constant access to food, so perfectly full mice, showed high levels of pain-coping behaviors, like licking an inflamed wound. But the food-deprived mice, their response was drastically reduced. They practically ignored the ongoing pain altogether. And honestly, the speed of this is wild. The data showed that just 24 hours of food deprivation was enough to trigger this biological override. After just one single day without food, the animals strongly suppressed their pain-coping behaviors and mechanical allodynia, which is pain caused by something that wouldn't normally hurt. Their brains were entirely focused on the need for food, not the ache of their injury. This chart visually proves it, and the difference is staggering. That towering bar on the left represents our well-fed subjects, spending a significant amount of time tending to their pain. But look at the bar on the right. It completely plummets for the food-deprived subjects. Mathematically and behaviorally, the hunger has almost entirely masked the persistent pain.
So that leads us to the chemical mute button. How exactly does an empty stomach tell the brain to ignore a throbbing injury? What's the actual mechanism here?
The secret is a highly potent chemical called neuropeptide Y, or NPY for short. NPY is a messenger released in the brain mostly during states of hunger and thirst. It turns out being hangry actually has some real biological perks. As researchers discovered, NPY doubles as the body's very own powerful internal painkiller. Let's break down how this pathway builds, step by step. First, a competing need, like starvation, arises.
Second, this triggers a flood of NYP in the brain. Third, that NYP travels straight to those Y1R neurons we found earlier in the lateral parabrachial nucleus. When the NYP binds to those receptors, it fundamentally inhibits them. Finally, step 4, the ascending pain signals coming up from the body are gated, meaning they're blocked from being fully integrated. Hunger literally hits the neurochemical mute button. If you look at these live neural activity recordings, you can see this biological mute button in action. Tracking the calcium dynamics, that top blue line shows a spike and sustained activity in a normal fed state. But look at the bottom graph. When the subject is hungry, that neural response just flatlines. The pain signal is mathematically and physically being gated out of existence by hunger. Now, it is absolutely vital to note that this mute button is highly specific. It only works on persistent, enduring pain. If a hungry animal touches something burning hot, they still react instantly. The acute pain is not suppressed at all. And, that makes perfect sense for survival. You can easily ignore a sprained ankle to go look for a meal, but you can't ignore a fire burning your paw, because acute pain requires immediate, life-saving action. All right, let's move to evolution and future treatments. Why did we evolve this incredibly complex system in the first place? And what could it mean for modern medicine?
Basically, what we're looking at is a beautifully elegant evolutionary triage system. In the wild, an animal simply cannot afford to be paralyzed by the long-term pain of a healing wound if it is actively starving. This internal NPY mechanism ensures that a lingering injury doesn't stop an animal from going out, foraging for food, and ultimately surviving.
This brilliantly illustrates a core conclusion from the source material. The idea that pain is a global brain and body state rather than a transient sensory experience has become widely accepted. We really have to stop thinking of pain as just a localized feeling in a bruised knee or a cut finger. It's a complex, highly modifiable brain state that can be dialed up or down based on the body's other urgent needs. To summarize our explainer today, our brain relies on an ensemble of Y1R neurons to track persistent, ongoing pain. But when we face a survival threat like severe hunger, our body releases NPY, which acts as a chemical mute button on those exact neurons. This elegantly suppresses the long-term ache while leaving our instant acute pain reflexes perfectly intact for immediate safety. And most importantly, by finally mapping this exact hub in the brain, researchers now have a brand new, highly specific target for developing chronic pain therapies. Which leaves us with this incredibly exciting, provocative final thought. If the brain already has a built-in, highly effective override switch for persistent pain, one that just requires the right chemical key, how soon can we learn to safely hack it? I mean, if we can activate this hub without needing to actually starve the patient, we could be looking at a revolutionary new way to cure chronic pain in humans. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how our incredible biology shapes our brain on pain and the way we experience the world.